Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of our ongoing editorial webinar series, Coffee Talk. Each hour-long, information-packed episode features the observations and insights of an independent expert on a wide range of tech industry topics. This episode was organized by the hardworking folks at PureAI.com and AWSinsider.net, and it's sponsored by Mission Cloud Services, provider of a cloud services platform purpose-built for AWS. Without their support, this series would not be possible. And thanks to you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of the Converge 360 Group of 1105 Media, and I'll be your moderator. Today's topic is AI technology and AWS, how AI will change the cloud in 2023 and beyond. And our lead presenter is scientist, author, and 21-time Microsoft MVP, Brian Posey. Before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. This episode is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way in the next few days. We'll make some time during the talk for some questions. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. On the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see some extra resources provided by our sponsor. Be sure to check those out. And as a small thank you to the first 200 attendees who stick with us all the way to the end, we will be sending you a $5 gift certificate to Starbucks. It's a cup of joe to go with the info. Now let's meet our first presenter. Brian Posey has written thousands of articles about information technology and contributed dozens of books and video training courses on a huge variety of IT topics. Among other professional roles, Brian served as the lead network engineer for the United States Department of Defense at Fort Knox and the head of the Technology and Engineering Group for the Association of Space Flight Professionals. He writes the popular Posey's Tips and Tricks column for Redmond Magazine, as well as the must-read Posey's Moonshot column, through which he shares his commercial astronaut training experiences. You are in for an awesome and informative session. He's one of our favorite presenters. Take it away, Brian.
Hey, thank you so much, John. So yeah, with the space training, these pictures were literally just taken a couple of days ago. I was down in Florida working on a simulated lunar surface, and those straps you see in the picture on the right are a gravity offset system, so they make it feel like you would feel when you're on the moon weight-wise. There's a crane up above me that can move along the ceiling so that you can actually do the walking and hopping like what you see in the old Apollo footage. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of hard work, but it was a lot of fun too. But one of the reasons why I mention all of that is just to point out that, I was traveling and I literally just did get back. And normally I wouldn't attempt to do a presentation so soon after having just traveled. But I really, really wanted to in this particular case because I consider this to be probably the most relevant topic that we could possibly talk about at the moment, because AI is completely upending everything. And I think that there are some serious discussions that need to be had around AI, both the good and the bad. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping to accomplish today. So this presentation is at least partially about Amazon's answer to AI, because, in recent months, various AI engines such as ChatGPT have been receiving a lot of headlines, but ChatGPT isn't the only AI that's out there. There are other companies that are working on competitive platforms, and Amazon is no exception. They've come up with their own platform, which they're calling Bedrock. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Bedrock, but more importantly, I want to talk about the implications of Bedrock and other technologies such as ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot and some of the other ones that are out there, because I think what's ultimately important is how is this going to change our lives? Is it going to change the way that you have to do your job? Are you even going to have a job after this? These are some important questions that need to be answered. So that's where I'm hoping to go with this presentation. So Bedrock. As I mentioned, Bedrock is a generative AI produced by Amazon. And the way that Amazon describes this is listed in the paragraph at the bottom of the slide. And I realize if you're watching this on a small screen device, this is going to be super difficult to read. So I'll just go ahead and read this paragraph for the benefit of anyone who can't. It just says, Amazon Bedrock provides you the flexibility to choose from a wide range of FMs being foundational models built by leading AI startups and Amazon. So you can find the model that's best suited for what you're trying to get done. With Bedrock's serverless experience, you can get started quickly privately customize FMs with your own data and easily integrate and deploy them into your applications using the AWS tools and capabilities that you're already familiar with, including integration with Amazon SageMaker, ML features like experiments to test different models, and pipelines to manage your FMs at scale without having to manage any infrastructure. So what is Amazon really saying here? Well, what they're saying is that Bedrock is going to be kind of an open-ended AI platform. You're going to be able to use foundational models to control what Bedrock can do. And these foundational models are going to work with some of the various Amazon services that already exist. So essentially what you're going to be able to do is build your own AI applications and plug those into the Amazon services that you're already using. That's where Amazon's trying to go with this. So what types of things can you do with Bedrock? Well, this slide came directly off of the Amazon website, and it lists some of the basic capabilities that Bedrock provides. Things like text generation, similar to what we have with ChatGPT, where you can ask it to give you a paragraph on a particular subject, or perhaps write a full-length report on a topic of your choice, or something like that. There's also chatbot capability and search capability, so that you can search the web for a particular topic. There's text summarization, and this is actually something that I've done just recently on ChatGPT. I had a great big long scientific paper that I needed to read, and I didn't have a lot of time. So I asked ChatGPT to give me a 2-paragraph summary, and it did a really good job of that. Image generation. This is similar to what we have with DALL-E or Microsoft Designer, which incidentally, if you haven't had a chance to play with Microsoft Designer, I recommend checking that one out. It's a lot of fun to mess with. The basic idea is that you write a few words describing what it is that you want, and the underlying AI will produce an image that matches up with what you're asking. In the case of Microsoft Designer, that could end up being a stock photography image that the AI has pulled from somewhere, or it could be something that it just draws on the fly. But I spent quite a bit of time, about a month ago, just trying to throw at various curveballs, asking for really bizarre and random things, and I didn't get absolutely perfect results, but it really surprised me on some of the things that I asked for by being able to produce those. And then the last thing that's listed is personalization. An example of this is if you've ever shopped on the Amazon store, and really who hasn't, you've no doubt seen how it recommends other products that you might be interested in. This is the type of personalization that you'll be able to do on your own site using the Bedrock AI. Now, as previously mentioned, Bedrock AI is based on foundational models. And from what I've been reading, Amazon is going to provide its own foundational models, which it's referring to as Amazon Titan. But it's also going to make foundational models available from other companies. So you'll be able to go to the marketplace and get the foundational models of your choosing. At least that's my understanding of it. So what does all this really boil down to? Well, for right now, we don't know because Bedrock is in an extremely limited preview and Amazon hasn't given a lot of people access to it yet. But based on the information that's publicly available, it seems that Bedrock is going to be primarily an API or application programming interface that you're going to be able to use to build your own applications using Bedrock AI. And Amazon's likely going to make the Titan-based services available for demonstration purposes or as tools for non-developers. Now, they haven't come out and said this. I'm just basing this on Amazon's past history. Typically, whenever they do release a new type of machine learning service, it's primarily designed for use by developers, but they'll put something out on the AWS platform where people who are non-developers at least have the ability to play around with it and to use it as is. And I'm really thinking they're probably going to do the same thing with Titan. But the most important considerations right now are how things like Bedrock and Titan and ChatGPT and other generative AI are going to change the world. And that's where I really want to center the rest of this discussion. So one of the first questions that I want to look at is, how will AWS be impacted by Bedrock and other large language models? And if you're not familiar with the term large language model, that's a phrase that was, I believe, initially adopted by ChatGPT, and it refers to an AI's ability to understand spoken language so that you can type a phrase or a question or whatever, and the AI knows what to do with it. That's what I mean by a large language model. So let's talk about how AWS is going to be impacted by Bedrock and other large language models, and generative AI such as ChatGPT. What can we really expect? Well, again, Amazon has released a really limited amount of information so far. But based on Amazon's past history and the information that has been released and what I've seen from other generative AI platforms, I am going to make a few predictions. And keep in mind, these are just predictions on my part. This isn't anything that Amazon has publicly released or anything like that. So the first prediction is that AWS has always focused heavily on development. It's a platform that's primarily designed for developers to use. So with that in mind, I look for AWS to use Bedrock as a tool for increasing application capabilities. In other words, you'll be able to use the functionality provided by Bedrock to add additional capabilities to the applications that you develop. But having said that, I think that Amazon is probably also going to look for ways to reduce the development time based on AI through code generation. Now, the slide that I showed you earlier with the Bedrock capabilities listed didn't list anything about code generation. But being that other AI platforms are already doing this and that Amazon does focus so heavily on development, I would be shocked if Amazon didn't offer this capability in the future. So the next prediction is that Amazon may end up leveraging Bedrock to add intelligence to existing AWS services. And I'm talking about things like EC2 or S3 or things like that. Because think about what's involved today when you set up an EC2 instance. Typically, there's a big, long wizard that you have to go through, and the process isn't difficult by any stretch of the imagination, but you do have to go through quite a few steps to get to the final result, particularly if you're trying to do something beyond just a generic virtual machine instance. So in the future, I kind of expect Amazon to provide you with an AI interface so that you can tell Amazon exactly what it is that you need, and it will just go do it. For example, you may end up telling AWS, hey, I need 5 new web servers running Microsoft IIS. And then the back end should be smart enough to know how to deploy those 5 web servers that you've asked for and provision them to meet your needs. So that's where I expect Amazon to go with Bedrock. The third prediction on the slide is that Amazon will likely also use Bedrock for root cause troubleshooting and for other functions such as billing predictions and capacity planning. So we've already seen this a little bit on other platforms, particularly with third-party products. I can think of a couple of third-party products that use AI for end-to-end troubleshooting of particular problems. In other words, these AI-based applications will ingest logging from a variety of sources and then use the logging data to help you pinpoint what's going on when problems occur. And I really think that Amazon is probably going to, if not immediately, eventually build something like that to help their customers to troubleshoot problems that they may experience within the AWS Cloud. And like I said, I also expect Amazon to use Bedrock and AI-based analytics for things like billing predictions to help their customers more accurately estimate what their bill is going to be, and for capacity planning. Now, interestingly, I think that it's also extremely likely that we're going to see Amazon use these exact same services on the back end, completely out of customers' view, because it makes absolute sense for them to do that. I mean, think about a cloud provider like Amazon. They must use a tremendous amount of hardware. So they could use AI for capacity planning purposes so that they can better estimate how many servers they need to order in a given month or how much storage they're going to need this month and things like that. They could even use it for budgeting purposes. By estimating their customers' usage, they may be able to do revenue projections on how much money they're likely to have coming in a given month. But again, these items are pure speculation on my part, but if my predictions are correct, or even if only half of them are correct, what it will mean is that it's going to eventually make drastic changes to the way that we use the cloud. So the next question that I want to talk about is, can these tools make your job easier? And I'm not talking specifically about Bedrock or Titan or anything like that. Just let's talk about generative AI in general. And we'll do that for the rest of the presentation. This isn't going to be Amazon specific. Can generative AI make your job easier? Well, the answer is that it depends. It's really going to depend on a lot of factors, such as what is it that you do with your job? How are these AI platforms integrated into the tools that you use? And more importantly, how well do they work? So let's talk about a few ways that AI could potentially make your job easier. One of the things that it can help with is scripting or coding. I've talked about this a little bit already, but existing AI platforms such as ChatGPT can write code for you. As a matter of fact, I've had it write PowerShell code for me just on a testing basis. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along a little bit later on. Generative AI can also help you to do research. And when I'm talking about research, I'm not talking about researching an article, which is something that I do every single day. What I'm talking about is researching things that you do in your job on a day-to-day basis. So some examples of that is, how do I do such and such? How do I change the power management power management profile in Windows? How do I add a printer? All of these how-to type things. Another way that you could use generative AI for research is by asking it if there is a vendor who offers a particular feature or capability that you need in order to grow your business. You might also be able to ask generative AI what licenses are going to be required in order to do some particular task in your organization. Because let's face it, software licensing has always been way overcomplicated. And this is one of those areas where AI can really help out. Imagine being able to tell AI what it is that you want to do and have it come back and say, okay, these are the software licenses that you're going to need. So you're not having to play games with vendors or guess about whether or not you're compliant on your licenses. You just know. That's not something that we can do today to the best of my knowledge, but it is something that seems extremely plausible for us to have, say, a year from now. Another way that you may be able to use an AI platform for research is to create a migration plan. Let's say you're going from an older version of Windows to a newer one. You may be able to ask a generative AI platform to develop a migration plan for you. And then once you've done that, ask it what things within your organization are likely to break if something goes wrong during the migration process. As IT pros, we've probably all got a good handle on that sort of thing already without the help of generative AI, but it may help from the standpoint of just pointing something out that we hadn't thought of. Generative AI may also be able to help us with management tasks. I'm talking about things like creating new user accounts or provisioning applications for new users. Rather than having to perform those tasks manually, we may be able to just ask AI to go and do that for us. The same thing could happen with storage provisioning. Maybe you need a new volume created on your SAN. That's something that AI in the future may be able to do for you, rather than you having to go and perform all of those steps manually. Generative AI might also be able to help you with your infrastructure. By analyzing that infrastructure and being able to give you the answers that you need regarding questions that you have about that infrastructure. For example, you might be able to ask generative AI, what are my biggest security vulnerabilities? And Microsoft is actually already working on something like that. It's going to be called Security Copilot, and it's going to be able to look at your existing infrastructure and answer security-related questions that you might have about that infrastructure. So this is something that's already in the works. The second thing on the slide, why is a particular user experiencing slow performance? And again, I've seen third-party tools that are able to do this, but this is one of those things that I expect AI to kind of take over and be able to do in the not-too-distant future. Another question, is any of my data not being backed up? That could cause massive problems for an organization if they've got a data silo that, for whatever reason, was not included in the backup. AI might be able to identify that oversight and help you to figure out what you need to get that data protected. Another question is, are any of my IT resources out of compliance? Now, obviously, the answer to that question would depend on what regulatory compliance you're subject to, but this is the sort of thing that AI might eventually be able to help you out with. And then, of course, there's capacity planning. When am I going to run out of storage space? When are my CPU resources not going to be enough? Questions like that. So these are just some examples of some ways that I envision AI making the IT professional's job easier in the future. But of course, as we talk about all of these new capabilities, we also have to consider, is dependence on AI going to put our jobs in danger? And unfortunately, the answer to that question in many cases might be yes. So in the remaining amount of time that I've got, this is the big question that I really want to delve into and talk about what the emergence of AI is going to mean for our jobs. So what types of jobs might be put in jeopardy? Well, developers, for one, may eventually find themselves hard-pressed to find jobs. We're not there yet, but that could happen in the future. Microsoft did a demo a while back. I forget which conference they did it at, in which they were showing their generative AI's ability to write code. And they described this AI as being one half of a pair programming team. For those who might not be familiar with pair programming, the idea is that typically two developers would work together on one workstation to write code collectively. So they're saying that AI could take the place of one of the developers in that team. Now, during that same demo, Microsoft did a demonstration in which they asked an AI to write a simple program to handicap a sporting event. I forget exactly what statistic it was they were trying to get from this, but they wanted to analyze a tournament and predict the odds that a certain team would win or lose in each case. So AI set about it, started writing code, and it got it wrong. So this particular AI ended up going in and debugging itself to fix the problem. I ran the program again. It still didn't work, so I did another round of debugging, and then finally got it right. Now, in my own opinion, I think that at least for right now, is kind of a best-case scenario. As I mentioned, I've experimented with using AI to write PowerShell code, and based on my own experiences, it's not quite that good just yet. What I found is that it'll give you a good starting point, but unless you're doing something really, really simple, you can't just depend on AI to get it exactly right for you every time. It's just not quite there yet. So, for example, one of the things that I did was I wrote a PowerShell script myself, and then I asked the AI to write the same script just to see what it would come up with. And there were similarities between the script that I wrote and the script that AI wrote. The basic logic was more or less the same. But the script that the AI came up with just didn't work. I ended up having to do some manual debugging before that one actually worked. So I think the resulting code was a really good starting point, but it didn't actually give me a functional script the first time around. So that's just something to keep in mind. So eventually AI might take the jobs of some developers, but it's not something you have to worry about just yet. So what are some other jobs that might eventually be in jeopardy? One possibility is help desk or first-line support because AI can answer those simple questions for you. Also, graphical artists. As I mentioned, things like DALL-E and Microsoft Designer can produce graphical content based on just asking it for what you need. Also, content creators, because AI can produce articles, short stories, pretty much anything else that you can think of. And those who produce how-to tutorials or videos. Unfortunately, I include myself in that group. But one of the things that I wanted to really point out and get you thinking about is the very most profound thing about AI, at least as I see it, is that it has the potential to drastically change the way that software is being used. I don't know how much you all have seen Microsoft Copilot, but Microsoft is releasing several AIs with the Copilot branding. And the very first one is going to be for Microsoft 365. And it's going to be basically a chatbot that's baked into the Microsoft Office applications. And you'll be able to simply tell this chatbot what it is that you need, and then Microsoft Office will go off and create that. So in some of the demos that Microsoft has given, it can create content a lot faster than a human could create it. But the more important thing is that it can do things without the user actually needing to know how it's done. So think about for a moment a really complex Excel spreadsheet. You don't have to know how to write formulas or how to perform analytics on the data within the spreadsheet. You can just ask Copilot to go and do that for you. So the user doesn't actually have to know how to use the software. So that's the really profound thing about generative AI, is that it can take away the need for knowing how the software works. You can just ask AI to do it rather than you having to perform the steps yourself. So eventually, you may even see the user interface for things like Microsoft Office or Windows or who knows what just completely go away because it won't even be needed anymore. You can do everything simply through the chatbot that's baked in. That may be the only interface item that exists in a few years. Now, do I expect Microsoft and others to go off and do that? Probably not completely, but I can envision a situation where the normal user interface is treated as expert mode and has to be manually enabled, and is just kept out of the way for those who would rather depend on the AI. That could be where we're headed with things. It's really hard to say. So what can you do to keep from losing your job to generative AI? Well, I think at least as it stands right now, the most important thing is to make sure that your employer knows about the limitations and the problems that are associated with generative AI. And again, I'm not talking about any one specific platform here. These are just kind of general statements. The first thing that your employer needs to know is that generative AI isn't perfect. Pretty much all of the major platforms out there, Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, and others, openly acknowledge that AI makes mistakes and that humans need to check the results for accuracy, that you can't just depend on what's been generated by AI and expect it to be perfect every single time. Even when that information is accurate, that information isn't always sourced. Now, there are some AIs that are in development that do show where the source material came from, but again, we're not quite there yet. And the problem with the information not being sourced is that because it's not sourced, you don't know, one, is it accurate? And two, you don't know if the information that's being presented has been plagiarized. There have been instances where some of the generative AI platforms have plagiarized content, so that's something that your employer will need to keep in mind. Another thing is that code that's generated by AI often contains bugs and security vulnerabilities. But more importantly, if you're asking AI to generate code and you have no idea how that code works, then that code is essentially a black box. It does its thing, but nobody really knows how it works or why it does what it does. And that's one of those things you might be able to get away with for a while, but it could eventually become a problem for the organization. And most importantly is that AI-generated recommendations really aren't a substitute for human intuition and experience. So is it all bad news? No, I don't think that it is all bad news. The way that I see it is that AI is going to drastically change the technology industry and IT as a whole. But having said that, we've seen other trends that had the potential to be almost as damaging, and those ended up being okay. So I'm just about out of time, but I do want to just spend a couple of minutes and mention these two trends. The first one is something called consumerization of IT. That's one of those trends you really don't hear much anymore. But what it was when the internet and all that first really started gaining mainstream traction, all of a sudden you had things that traditionally fell within the realm of IT being done by standard users. I'll give you a really fast example. I got my first Wi-Fi access point back in, I think it was 1999, like before Wi-Fi was a mainstream technology, before most people had ever heard of it. You know, today you can go to the store and spend, $40 or $50 for a cheap access point, and you can be up and running in 5 or 10 minutes. Well, it was a lot different back then. Back then, an access point cost thousands of dollars, and setting it up was a major ordeal. You had to have a deep working knowledge of enterprise networking just to make it work. The way that it's been simplified and the way that you can find it at any retailer, that's an example of the consumerization of IT. And Wi-Fi isn't the only technology that falls into that. I mean, think about it. You go to Walmart and you can find patch cables among the impulse items in the checkout lane. That never ever would have happened way back when. So the idea is that there are certain things that used to be solely the domain of the IT department that are now handled by the consumer. It didn't spell the death of IT. It just meant that things changed a little bit. The other example is the public cloud. Back when the public cloud first really came about, there was a CEO of a major technology company. I'm not going to name the name, but this particular CEO invited myself and several other technology journalists to their corporate headquarters. And we spent a day there talking about cloud, but the overall message was, you may want to start looking for a new job because everything's going to be done in the cloud a year or two from now, and there won't be any need for IT anymore. Well, we all see how that turned out. You know, things are different in the technology space than they used to be, but if anything, cloud kind of complicated things because now we have hybrid clouds and multi-cloud environments, and there's a lot of intricacy involved in making all of these things work together. So IT is still needed. And my hope is that with generative AI, we're going to see the same type thing. We're going to see a major evolutionary shift in the role of the IT professional, but I don't think that IT is going to completely go away, or at least I hope not. So with that said, I am probably a couple minutes over on my time, so I want to go ahead and open it up for question and answers.
You bet. You're doing great, Brian. I just want to remind attendees you can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Lynn Ma's wondering, and you've touched on this. If effectively, you're saying that AI is going to change everything, but this question is: could new AI technologies be used to optimize cloud infrastructure and improve the efficiency of data processing?
That's a really interesting question. I think that right now we're not there yet. I fully expect to see that. But my guess is to really optimize cloud infrastructure, you're probably going to more see that from a third party, because a platform like, say, Amazon or Azure, they're going to be mostly focused on their own cloud. And so if you've got resources that reside in another cloud but that are connected, it may not take those resources into account. So my guess is that you're probably going to see a solution from a third-party developer that will do a more effective job of that than anything that would be found on the native platform.
Okay, so here's one. The person's wondering, how can I get access to AWS Bedrock?
Unfortunately, right now there doesn't seem to be a way. Amazon has this in extremely limited preview. So I believe it's invitation only at the moment, but that should be opening up to a wider trial in the not too distant future. So I would just keep an eye on the AWS site to see when that opens up.
Did you hear about this Code Whisperer component of Bedrock?
No, I can't say that I have.
Okay, so we've got another one here. What IT skills / knowledge do you see being most useful and in demand as the industry develops, i.e. AI-assisted coding, AI management, language model development?
I think all of those things are going to be critically important. I would add one more thing to that, and I'm not even sure that there's a name for this, and certainly I don't have a good name for it, but AI decipherer, if that's even a word. When AI makes a bad decision, somebody who can go in and figure out, okay, why in the world did it come up with this, and what can we do to do a better job than what it's recommending?
Okay, thank you. Here's one. Can AI totally replace a human being in a call center or a customer security desk?
Sadly, I think that it probably can. I don't know of a single platform right now that does it all, but if you think about the how much speech recognition technology has improved over maybe the last 10 years, and you combine that speech recognition with an underlying large language model platform like, say, ChatGPT, you could probably come up with something that would be able to completely replace your call center employees.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions in this general area. How far are we away from AI being smarter than humans? And I'm not even sure how you'd measure smarter, but
yeah,
I guess one way to do that question might be, how far are we from general artificial intelligence?
Well, let me answer it like this. When you train an AI, you use something called a classifier to train it. And that classifier is training AI on one very specific thing. Large language models like ChatGPT have billions of classifiers. But generally, the way that AI works is with sufficient training, it becomes really, really good at doing whatever it was that it was trained against, that one specific classifier that it's designed to work on. And with regard to that one specific task, it can become more accurate, faster, better than a human. The problem is that humans have countless things that they do every single day. They're just way more flexible, way more diverse than an AI could ever hope to be. So I can see AI rivaling or even exceeding human intelligence in extremely specific use cases. But as a general, no, I just don't see AI ever exceeding human capabilities on everything.
You know, you've heard, of course, that a lot of the executives out there, or some key executives, are calling for a slowdown in the development of AI, and that kind of goes with this question, which goes like this. It's well worded. Now let's turn to the dark side of AI use. What new cyber challenges are we going to face? Probably means cybersecurity challenges are we going to face, and how will we defend against them?
Oh gosh, there are going to be so many, because anytime new technology comes out, the cyber criminals almost immediately jump on that and look for ways to exploit that technology for their own gain. There are any number of ways that AI could potentially be used by criminals, but the one that I've been hearing about a lot lately is phishing emails. It's such a simple thing, but a lot of times phishing emails are instantly recognizable because they use really poor grammar, or they ask for things that are just ludicrous that nobody would fall for. But the cyber criminals have access to these large language model platforms, and they could easily say, hey, take this email that I've written and clean it up and make it sound more professional. And all of a sudden you've got something that's a whole lot more difficult to identify as a phishing message.
So we've got a question from, and I mentioned the name Wahid because it's the question is supervised learning versus unsupervised learning. Maybe you could clarify a little bit, Wahid, what you're asking. Meanwhile, the most fascinating thing to me about the evolution of this technology is the hallucinations. The sort of the desire to pull together the relationships in a sentence or however that works to come up with a totally fanciful answer. How is that going to impact the adoption of AI, do you suppose, that particular trait or quality?
I'm not even really sure that I've got a good answer for that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I was hoping to hear more from Wahid, but I think that's...
I got you covered.
Maybe that's a good spot.
Supervised
go
versus unsupervised learning. Basically what that is supervised is when you train a classifier on a specific task. Unsupervised learning, which I think there may be a couple of different forms, but the one I'm most familiar with is when all of a sudden the AI begins creating its own classifiers so that it begins learning other tasks that it may not have originally been explicitly told to learn.